Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Darsh Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
All right, guys, we're back with another Lessons Learned with Dr. Darsh. How are you, buddy?
What's up? What's up? Good, man. Good. I am hanging out, doing okay. Weather's getting warm, man. So I've definitely got a huge correlation between my mood and the weather. So it's nice.
I think a lot of people do.
Oh yeah,
I think that's pretty common. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Although, it's so crazy because there's no such thing as spring, like at all.
Yeah, I just went straight to summer.
Yeah, that's always the case. It's such a stark contrast now, and it's just that's the depressing part of it, where it goes from like being cold and snow, especially where I am, to then 87 and humid. So
yeah.
But the mornings are nice. That's my favorite part of the day.
It is.
Sure.
It is. Yeah. Nice, man. How about you? What's up with you? Got done your boards? Congrats.
Yeah, I think so. At least I got done taking them.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're done with them for good. There's always, it's funny because I tell my non-medical friends, I'm like, hey, I'm taking my boards, and they're just like, you're always taking an exam. I don't even understand. Like, are you ever done? Like, I don't know. I was like, no. There's another one in the fall actually I'm preparing for. So there's that. So
what is that? Is that oral or
sports?
Oh, then what? Oh, this was your oral boards. That's right.
Yeah.
I totally forgot it was oral. I thought you were taking your sports med boards. That's right. No, oral, and then you have sports. Gotcha.
Yeah. Beautiful PM&R decides to do. Yeah. It's one of the maybe 3 specialties that still has 2 parts. So
orals. That's right.
Interesting experience, but like I said, we'll see if a couple of years is still going.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Well, listen, we had a couple of amazing guests, and for 2 of them, you were flying solo and kicking butt. But the first part, we'll start off because I think they're somewhat distinct topics, right? The first one's more in the financial aspect, talking student loans, which we got a lot of amazing feedback because
we did.
This is such a complex and confusing topic, and unfortunately, we only had Megan Landress from Student Loan Planner, and she has her own business as well, for about an hour or so, and we try to pack a lot in there. So hopefully people weren't more confused. And if so, we linked a lot of good resources, and we'll link it again here. But, this is a space that I've been investing in for a long time personally, because it affects me deeply. But you're one of the few lucky people who doesn't have a great amount of student debt burden.
That's right.
So jealous, but so tell me, man, what were your key takeaways? Like, what did you learn, and what follow-up questions would you might have, like, for her?
So let me first start off by saying, this is, I think, the first episode where I've gotten feedback through social media from pre-meds, medical students, and residents. Like my co-residents actually listened to this episode and were like, oh, I listened to the financial burden episode. I was like, this is the topic, of course, that affects millions and millions across the U.S., right? So it's gonna hit the heart of a lot of people. I was just, I'm coming in this blind, right? I knew absolutely nothing. You're on one end of the spectrum and I'm on the other. So for me, it was a little tough registering all of it. But then when I go back and listen to it again, I'm like, oh, wow, this is packed with a lot of good information. And the biggest thing I realized is just Megan's attitude towards how to handle financial debt, right? So a lot of us, especially in the medicine realm, think there's only one way to do something, right? I think we're also programmed that way, right? If you're going to medical school, you're learning one way. When you go to residency, you're learning one way, and it's tough for us to branch out a little bit. But hearing it from someone non-medical talk about money and finances in a way to say, hey, if this is your situation, or let's say you're going dermatology and you probably won't do PSLF, right? Because you're going to be in private practice. Like, that doesn't mean you're at a disadvantage, right? So there's no such thing as advantage, disadvantage. There's only the right path and plan for you. And so that, I think, was one of the best takeaways that I've seen, that now when people ask me, I can at least point them towards that. I actually went IG Live the other day, and one of my followers said, hey, I'm going to actually do a free consult with Megan, because he's just so terrified of how much debt he's going to be in. He's already in 100K and he hasn't even started med school. And he's afraid of, when he goes to the med school, top that off with another 400, what situation is he going to be? And that's the exact rhetoric that I used with him, was the one that Megan was talking about. So it was just cool to see that.
Yeah. I mean, everything that you mentioned is so spot on. And the other interesting piece of it is the whole student loan space, the whole landscape is so fluid, right? Particularly recently, since the episode came out, and I forget if after it was published or, I think Biden hinted at student loan cancellation. And so now the media has taken that and it's been running with it. I think the other piece of it, depending whichever side of the political spectrum you are on, this is a polarizing topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in today's day and age, everything we can use to create, polarity and divide and to use it, people are going to use it. And so, so for those reasons, I think the media takes it and blows it out of proportion, even though when things aren't coming out, like things that we talked about the mass headlines of that, 90 something percent of people get rejected and people blow it out. And so what's upsetting to me about this is I talk to so many of my co-residents and co-fellows who are so brilliant and have student loan, and they just don't have any hope. They're like, oh yeah, it's probably not going to happen, because that echo chamber, as she talked about, it's just, on repeat and louder and louder and louder. And with time, for some reason, when there's a thing that's, if something's been around long enough, it tends to be more and more true, right? Because enough people repeat it. And so people are like, oh yeah, if that's going to happen. And, she mentioned several reasons why it's here to stay. Like, you're grandfathered in. If it's changing, if it's ever changing, it's going to be for the future generations. And it seems to happen so slow. Like, we talk about medicine taking forever to make changes. This isn't much better. So I encourage people to go back and listen to it. And she talks about all the reasons why it's going to stay. And, even on their podcast, I'll plug them in, Student Loan Planner, Travis and Megan, all those guys, they do a tremendous job. I mean, I think Travis has blogs on it, and Travis Hornsby is the guy who pretty much owns it. He's the founder of Student Loan Planner. He's got amazing blogs. If you feel like reading it, like several thousand words to go really deep into it, of why there's no way this is going away. So I have zero doubt in my mind. And that's encouraging for me. But the other side of it, towards the end, she talked about, we spent a lot of time talking about loan forgiveness just because that's the hot button topic, but that might not always be the right thing for everybody. And people don't have to feel like they have to do that. The student that you talk about, who's going in 100K and maybe comes out of medical school, doesn't go to state school, with another 250, right? So graduates at 350, 400. It's like, well, you know what? I got to do PSLF. Like that's it. It's a no brainer. And then you're hamstrung and you hate your job. And as we're going to talk about the next two episodes about how powerful, how important it is to not tie yourself down because you feel like you have to do something, right? And both of our next two guests were brave enough to break away from that.
Yeah, I want to quickly. Did you get a chance to listen to the last VP ZD episode?
No, not yet, man.
Okay, so they actually talk about student loans, and so I'll bring this up here because you talk about both sides, right? And so I'll first start off by, so I wrote a tweet, right? Actually, the tweet was just putting the video up of the editing that we did, right? And I got a comment saying like, obviously they were way off to the side extreme and just being like, this is not my duty to pay for you, and et cetera, and like you should be taking care of your own student loans. And, I mean, that is the rhetoric out there probably with half of the US. But, Vinay Prasad and Zubin Damania are talking about how a lot of doctors are complaining about the debt, right? And I think they're a generation above us, not so far off, but just one. But they talk about how the lowest quartile, of making money as a physician is still higher than any other profession out there, right? In the law field, in engineering field, in manufacturing, whatever it might be, right? As a doctor, your minimum salary is always going to be higher. And so it is more than possible to pay off our debt as physicians, right? But the one thing they don't, and so their argument is that, hey, student loan forgiveness shouldn't be a thing because what about one, the people who don't have loans, or two, the people who already paid them off? Like, how is this fair for them, right? They're not really, it's that classic residency mentality, like my life sucks, so your life will suck too. The one thing they don't bring up though, is like the emotional and mental toll it's been taking on people. Right? I mean, now more than ever, now that mental health is actually being talked about, and again, we're going to be talking about this soon with our next guest, like that whole discussion was missed, right? And that's what I loved Megan's answer when we asked her, like, how do we put the health back in healthcare? It was really about finding the right path so that you can limit that burden on your mental health. And so that's the case that I would argue against people who say, oh, it's your duty, like we all had to go through this, et cetera, et cetera, is that, well, you're missing, this whole generation is burning out, right? There's a whole reason why a lot of us are having or not going into medicine. So we are now having a shortage. And then two, a lot of burnout. So people even just leaving medicine.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think that whole argument about it's not fair for the people before, I get it. I get that side of it, but I think we always, maybe not always, the goal, in my opinion, should be to make it better, right? Mm-hmm. And to figure out the system better. I mean, we could also look at it like, why the hell is the cost that high anyway?
Right.
The other interesting thing is like, okay, so I've been looking at the housing market lately, right? Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because my parents, like folks that bought homes in 1990 and 1985, like the home that they bought for $100,000 is now $500,000, but also going for $600,000.
Yeah.
And it's just incomprehensible to them, like, how is the market, right? And so it's in every respect, it's increasing. And with that, like what I would say, somebody who went to medical school 25 years ago, they didn't pay nearly as much as somebody who's going to be going to medical school next year.
And by the way, I think and the pay is the same, right? Like now from 80s, like it barely has increased, right? So,
well, you know what? I'd even argue it's less, right?
Yeah,
like in terms of reimbursement wise. So like in terms of procedural reimbursement, sure. It's not quite the same. Not only that, but I would say maybe the workload is greater. So the residency and training and that kind of stuff has gotten better for sure.
Right.
But in terms of, we're talking about EMRs, right? Or the mandatory retirement, right? We're talking about how every physician, I think VPCD, those guys talk about it, right? Oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. Stock related his name, man. He was
Peter Valenzuela?
Peter Valenzuela, right. So Peter talks about how, like, I remember him posting a little cartoon about maybe for every 1 hour we spend for patient care, he's spending about an hour and a half to 2 behind a computer. And most people are taking their work at home. So, and that's actually affecting people too. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not practicing medicine for the reasons why people talked up medicine to be. So, I mean, that's a whole another rabbit hole that we can go down, and something we actually want to talk about, we just didn't have the time. But I think that overall, what I would highly recommend people is before you make any impulsive decision on student loans, really sit down and either spend the time to educate yourself, or hire somebody who's really invested in this and just understands. And because it's so fluid, it's so dynamic, and things are changing every single day. For instance, like there are decisions that people make that are just permanent, right? You come out of medical school and you think that refinancing is the way to go, and you haven't thought every single aspect of it through, and then you do that, and that's it. It's gone. Now PSLF is off the table for you. Another thing that came up because a close friend of mine, they didn't know the difference between consolidation and refinancing. Mm-hmm. And we talk a little bit about that, right? And so, if some people are pursuing PSLF and they come out of medical school, so when I graduated in 2017, there were really 4 main carriers, right? You had Navient, you had Great Lakes, you had Fed Loans, and I can't think of the last one. But if you were considering PSLF, you had to have the loans consolidated, and Fed Loans have to house your loans, right? So for me, it was Navient. And so Fed Loans had to consolidate and essentially buy the loans from Navient. And then I could be on track. Any payments not made through Fed Loans do not count towards PSLF, right? And so some people are sitting there, like I actually know people who are like, oh yeah, I'm on track for PSLF, but they never consolidated with Fed Loans. So that's 3 years gone or 4 years gone. Like, ugh. So now it's like, okay, well, now we need to rethink your plan because you just lost 4 years of residency training, particularly with COVID, right? With $0 payments.
Right.
So I encourage people to really think about it because, I mean, even the language gets so mucky, right? Like IDR is this umbrella term, but then you have IBR, and then you have ICR, which are actual plans. Then you have repayment. So, again, we touched a little bit on those things, different types of loans. So I encourage people to definitely check that out, but also, follow along, follow Megan along, follow Travis along. Go to studentaid.gov. It's actually straightforward website for like a government run website. Wow. It's not that disgusting. So it's not bad. It's not the prettiest, but it gets the information across.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, highly recommend everyone watch that episode, or let's just listen to it. That was a great one. So we move on now to our next episode. So we're definitely going to just switch topics here, but some of this stuff is related, right? So we brought on someone I met through Instagram, Benjamin Morrell, who's also a physician, but interestingly, he dropped out during his second year of psychiatry residency to pursue his own high performance coaching business. So I flew solo on this, like you said, but you got the chance to listen to it. What were the things that kind of blew your mind or, really resonated with you?
The term dropped out almost has a negative connotation to it. And I think
Right.
he made that clear distinction that it's not because I think people say, oh, somebody dropped out, they must have not been strong enough, quote unquote, to withstand the rigors of residency training or just not competent enough. And it's a very thoughtful, clear discussion, talk about the circumstances with his family about how he needed to do that. But not only it's just, it wasn't the fit. It wasn't what was dressed up to be as, which is a sad reality for a lot of folks. I think about amazing story, right? He talked about Native American background, and he also talks about the cultural differences, which is a larger question that we ought to talk about or think more about. We talk a lot about mental health. That's what these last two guests you guys focused on. We spent a great deal of time on this episode, on this show, talking about it. And I think in the United States, that's something that we tend to address a lot on. It's bigger focus, particularly with professional athletes speaking on it, right? But culturally in other countries, right? For instance, in the South Asian countries where we come from, he talked about Native Americans. That's really not a thing.
Man, I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
Grown up,
I don't
right?
yeah. I'm not really sure. Like, you tell immigrant, which I am, and so you tell their South Asian parents, like, hey, like I'm depressed. Like, what is that?
Right.
And so I think that as a physician, actually, and I've had to tell people on the other side this is, when you're dealing with people from other culture, because this is a melting pot, and you're trying to tease out into what might be a mental ill health issue versus a true organic like pathology, like when it's a brain injury, a stroke, or something like that. Be very deliberate and sensitive in how we approach it to try to tease out. Because if you bring up that thing and you would think, oh, maybe this person's going to be open to having this conversation, they might not even acknowledge that as a pathology, dare I say, right? So I think I thought that was really interesting, and I resonated with that.
Nice. Yeah, I think the thing for me, and the reason I really value Ben, is that he tells you things straight up, right? So with his story, he was so confident enough in his abilities that without any certification, right? He calls himself a life coach. He doesn't have a life coach certification. And when you ask him, he said, you become a life coach by living life, right? Like he's went through it. He's been there. He's done it. He knows perspective and the deeper perspective for that matter. So he's so confident in his abilities that he can choose to leave residency and then say, hey, I'm going to start something with my strengths, right? And his strengths being coaching, understanding mental health, and getting people out of a tough time, especially with a psychiatry perspective, which is really what he's good at. And I remember talking to him offline once, and he's like, "Oh, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to do?" And I told him, after PM&R residency, I really want to get functional medicine, integrated medicine, lifestyle boarded. And he's like, "Well, why aren't you starting now? Why don't you just coach now?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to, waiting." And he's like, "Well, what are you waiting for? Just do it, right? Like, you got to be confident in yourself." And so I think a lot of the times, people who are listening to this, all of us have these opportunities that are in front of us, and we know we should go for them, or we know we should build that website or whatever it might be, but we choose not to because, one, we're afraid, and we mask that fear by saying we need to become more competent, right? Because we understand that competence is what increases confidence, but you have to understand that you are already competent, right? Like, you become competent through experience, not just through learning. And so I was actually just listening to Art of Coaching podcast on my run today, and they talk about that. They talk about how we mask ourselves, or mask our fears rather, by choosing not to go into something because we think we need to learn more, when in reality, we probably already have the knowledge.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring up that competence, because I think that's one of the reasons we continue doing training, right? Like, we're told that until you go through medical school, you're not a physician, so you're not competent. Right? We started the conversation about how many board exams I have to take.
Yeah.
So you got to keep taking them, because you are not competent until you become board certified. Right? You got to become double board certified. Oh, well, you're board certified? Well, you've only been practicing for a year. you don't know anything. You just learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh, you've been 5 years, you got to get 10 years, right? And all that kind of stuff. And then, and it's really interesting. I actually, I'm going to skip ahead here. I was thinking about something that you and Seema talked about, how, a lot of, I remember she was mentioning when, during her pre-medical phase, when she was going through that, she mentioned how like we view everything through life through our own filters, right? And if we haven't accumulated enough experience, right, then we lack the wisdom. And we know that, as you just suggested, there's nothing better in life than experience, right? A better teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But the question, like, I want to ask you is that, because you do this far more than I do, right? Like, well, actually, I'm going to ask you that question later on, I think, when we approach it. What I do want to come back to is this other thing that she said. She talked about the societal pressures for not being good enough, right? So, because I think that's more applicable here. So we talk about competence, so training. You're looking for external validation, right? I got to be board certified. I got to be double board certified. And once you're in medical school, you're happy. But then you get to third year, you get to fourth year, and now you got to make a decision on what residency specialty you want to do. So you're like, oh, plastic surgery or dermatology. Maybe that means you're better, right? Internal medicine, pediatrics. Okay, backups, right?
That's right.
And then if you get there, then it's like, oh, well, you're not going to do fellowship? Why not? Right? What's wrong with you? Right? You got to continue doing that more, because why? Because you're not competent enough.
Yep.
And then you got to do another fellowship maybe, or something else. And so I think that it's a really, the challenge that I have with it though is sometimes you get through all of that and you realize you still haven't gotten to where you want to be.
Yeah.
And then that's the challenge.
I think so. Right. And I think, as the Stoics would say, and I just listened to a Ryan Holiday podcast on this as well, right? Learning is lifelong. There's no way you're going to get out of it. Right. But you can't read every single book and expect to just have that knowledge, and now all of a sudden you become the master, right? Like you can gain that knowledge, and you of course need a foundation and fundamentals. And so, yeah, I do think getting a certificate in some way puts some credential to your name, right? If you are trying to business, you're trying to recruit, you're trying to grow an audience, you're going to need some sort of validation or certification for others to also look. But we have turned into a society of status, right? And that's exactly where, plastics, derm, ortho, if I can do that, even though my heart may not be into it, the status is there, right? It's the same reason my parents asked me, so what are you going to do after residency? Like asking what type of fellowship are you doing, right? And I came into PM&R thinking, all right, what fellowship am I going to do? Never once did I think, what if I just went general? And now, after becoming a little bit more self-aware and saying, well, what's my end goal, right? It's not about going to the best university. It's not about getting the best credentials. It's the impact I want to make and how can I make that? And we've talked about this too, right? Like starting the website, just going for it and growing the audience and just beginning now so that we have enough years behind us for when we're truly ready to launch, right? And more than ever now, I'm okay with just going as a general physiatrist because I think it's more actually aligned with my goals and, really learning the difference between a specialist versus a generalist and which of my strengths actually aligns with what. And so, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
No, I was gonna say, so like the analogy I like to use is like somebody on a diving board ready to jump into the water, right? And the water being that thing that we crave the most. But we're on that diving board and we're so scared of just jumping off, right? But what we're afraid of is not being able to float. What we're afraid of is that impact for the most part, right? It's that initial, damn, this is gonna be hard and this is gonna hurt. But what I like to tell people is if you're going to jump off that diving board, you might as well try a somersault or a front flip and just enjoy whatever the hell you're doing and go backwards, whatever. Because regardless, you're going to land and you're going to be okay. You're going to float, right? You're going to be able to swim. And once you do it once, you're going to do it again and you're going to do it again, again, again until you become a better diver, eventually. So I think that process was what people are kind of afraid of, right?
Yeah. And to your point about status is one reason. I would say sometimes people also make those decisions based on their financial circumstances because they're like, hey, I got a lot of student loans. Yeah. I got to go in this higher earning specialty so I can pay them off, right?
Yeah. Which is interesting with the whole NYU and Columbia now saying med school's free because I don't know how much of that's actually making an impact for people to say, oh, now that money's not an issue, I can go into primary care. You know what I mean?
When was the first class that happened for?
I want to say...
It's been a while.
I think they might graduate this year or last year, because I think it was like my first or second year of medical school is when they started that. But my rationale was like a lot. I see both sides, right? A lot of people who are actually in debt are also like, you know what? I just want to do family medicine and just start making money right away. Boom, just go general. Mm-hmm. But I've also, now that people are like, oh, I don't have debt. Well, what's stopping me from going into residency for 6-7 years and making a resident salary, knowing that after that, I'll be living the high life? So right. I'm curious to see what the data shows, after they do this. But their whole idea was at least, hey, let's pay medical school for these students so that we have more primary care physicians because we're in a shortage nationwide.
I'm not really sure how it's going to incentivize students to not pursue, because I think it's funny because what you're talking about. We should be thinking about, hey, like down the road, who do you want to help? What are the patient population that you want to work with? I did a little mini lecture for a couple of first and second year med students yesterday. And, they wanted to know what the field of PM&R was. Mm-hmm. Man, such a broad, all encompassing field. But a lot of the follow-up questions were about sports medicine. Mm-hmm. And it could be because I'm sports medicine, but also because the two most popular subspecialties within PM&R are sports and pain, right? Musculoskeletal medicine. And so I think that when I generally advise people, when I generally tell people to think about what it is that you might want to do in the future, it's like, who do you want to work with? What kind of patient population? How do you see yourself thriving? Which is what we were just talking about offline. Mm-hmm. Do you really want to do that thing that you're saying? Yeah. So that's going to be hard. Like, how are these students are going to be like, yeah, just because, I'm not going to pay, because also we spent the first half of the episode and discussion with Megan. It's like, don't let the financial piece allow that to make decisions that you're going to regret down the road. So just because it's free, I'm going to do like family medicine. Again, nothing wrong with that. God, we freaking need more and more, of course. Yeah. But I don't know. So yeah, I'm excited to see that as well. But bringing it back to like what Ben was talking about, another thing that he brought up that was really interesting to me. He talked about people with trauma, about how there's two subclasses of how they react or cope, I should say.
Yeah.
Right. There's the one aspect of it. I mean, this is super broad, but there's the one aspect of it that they're looking for like some type of external means to deal with it. Right. And so conventionally we think of these as substances that people engage in or dissociate with from reality. And the other side, which is what a lot of us physicians tend to be, and I actually find myself to be in this category.
Same here.
It's just hyper focusing on tasks to escape the reality. It's like, how do I solve this problem? Mm-hmm. And when I solve that problem, I find another problem to solve.
Oh, absolutely. Dude, I was
even when there are problems to solve, because once you run out of all the problems and you've solved all the problems, now you got to sit there and look at the issue at hand and like, oh shit.
Yeah. Yeah. So to, again, drop another podcast that I listened to yesterday was Cal Newport's Deep Questions, right? And it's all about his book, Deep Work. And he brings a lot of the ideas in there, and they talk about shutting down, right? Like, how do you shut down after work so that you just do not think about it, regardless of who you are and what you do? There should be a time in your day where you say, I'm going to have my shutdown routine. And my shutdown routine involves like reading philosophy and reading other books just so I can tie it back to work and my career. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know if I shut down. I think Mira would even tell me I probably don't, because I'm just always thinking. But yeah, it's just how we're wired, why we go into this field, I guess, too. But as long as I feel it's not, you got to be self-aware in the end, right? You have to understand how much of this is actually hurting you versus are you tolerating it versus, hey, you actually need to shut this off for a good amount of time and then come back to it. So it's just a balance.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit on the previous lesson, or maybe our two lessons ago, when I asked you is how do you stay in the moment when you're thinking about the future and the past at the same time, right? Yeah. We got a little existential there. I tell people there's no such thing as type B in medicine, right? I mean, there's type A and there's type A1, maybe type A2 and type A3. But there's really no type B. And I'm not really sure that you could be successful and get through all the rigors that we talked about. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't, I don't think, necessarily mean that we have to be this hyper stressed, hyper focused person as well. Right. Like coming back to relating what Seema talked about, right? There's a difference between working hard and working with intent. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think a lot of what you talk about, it's really important to tease out what I'm hearing after she said that is when you come and you read that book and you apply that to whatever lesson that you might have learned earlier, is you're intentfully thinking how can I relate it to the experiences I've had?
Absolutely.
And what can I take from that. And so maybe the next time when you're actually going through an experience, you can do that in the moment. You don't have to go back. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, that's super, 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 super accurate. That's exactly what I told Mira. So I was like, anytime I read, anytime I'm watching a YouTube video, anytime I listen to a podcast, I'm there with the goal of what do I take away from this? Because it relates back to like social communication, social cues, because I realized how important networking is, right? In terms of just a career growth aspect. And meeting people and how much happiness that brings to me. Like for me as an extrovert, like I could talk to people all day, anytime. And one of my keys is like adding value, right? Like how do I add value to other people's lives? So if I can take these nuggets by having intent in whatever I'm doing, and I'm always thinking, well, what can I take away that I can share with someone to help improve their life? And by doing that, it's going to improve mine, right? And it just becomes this chain reaction. So when you talk about, past, present, future kind of thing, that's exactly where my mind is. It's at intent.
Yeah, I love that. Well, man, I feel like, at least I've been going back and forth between Ben and Seema because I do think that they were somewhat similar topics. I mean, they had somewhat definitely unique journeys and powerful journeys, but it was kind of one of the same in terms of like, the inspiration that they provided and a dose of reality. It's like, okay, really take that big look in the mirror or 30,000 foot overview that we talk about and really evaluate your own existence and say, hey, am I on the path of where I want to be? If not, why not? First of all, when am I going to fix it? And why am I not going to fix it now?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me what, you were there with Seema? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say, I agree with you. I mean, these episodes are one and the same, right? I mean, just for the audience to recap, if you haven't listened to these, both of them were in the medical field as professionals, right? So Ben was a psychiatry resident, and then he left to become a high performance coach. And Seema was a dentist, geriatric dentist, mobile dentist, and then she left her career to become a transformational high performance coach as well. So a lot of the themes in both of these episodes mirror one another. They're just coming from two different perspectives, right? And I think that's why having them back to back is so cool. And that's why I encourage everyone to listen to these, because you're going to resonate in some sort of way. So in some way that they talk about, you're going to say, okay, that's me, or I've been through this, because they have such unique experiences. You have Ben, who's kind of the generational just resident leaving it. And then you have Seema, who's the parent, trying to support two kids, has a husband, and then leaving that, chasing her passion, which was actually coaching the whole time. And, another takeaway that I can relate to is I'm reading the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. And Naval's biggest thing in terms of building wealth is finding out your strengths, right? Like, what is that thing when you were younger that was specific knowledge? It was innate that your mother would always say, or your dad or friends would always characterize you by, right? For me, it was always like helping out that stranger or always being like social. And then relating it to sports as well. Like, you couldn't get me off the playing field. I'd be first one in, last one out. And so how do you take that and then look at it in terms of your passion and form something around that, right? So for Seema, I think it comes down to the speaking, the coaching, guiding people through meditation, the wellness aspect. And then you have Ben, who's a little bit more of the high energy, also taking people through the same thing, but more from the mental health aspect, more from the motivation and discipline aspect. So when I read this book and then I look back at our guests, it's just such a cool parallel to see how both of them chase their passions in the same field with just two different angles.
That's well said, man. And I think that's a great place to close out. I had other questions to ask, but I don't think it's going to add more any value speaking to that. More so that's what's already been said and what you've said. So like I said, I really enjoyed it. I wasn't there, so I really listened as part of the audience. Fan of your work as well as the guests. You guys did a great job. So I encourage you guys to go check all those out. And as always, we would love to hear your feedback. You can hit us up on social. We're on all platforms. Mm-hmm. Email works as well, medredefined@gmail.com. The good, the bad, the ugly, it's all helpful. This is a lot of work. So if there's something that we're changing up that you're not liking, let us know. And if nothing else, it'll make our life easier. So, yep. Anything else?
So, yeah, if you want to know what our guests look like, please check out our Instagram, Twitter, because we actually have videos up now. So you can definitely check out the short clips of golden nuggets that they're leaving on these episodes. So you can find us there.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need to see our faces. Yeah,
Oh yeah, we're not on there.
Yeah.
That's right.
Awesome, man. All right, buddy.
All right.
Till next time.
Yep. See you, man.
Thank you so much for tuning into another Lessons Learned episode. Darsh and I are incredibly appreciative of your support, and we welcome any feedback that you might have regarding what you're enjoying, and even tell us what you're not enjoying, things that we can possibly improve on. Maybe some guest recommendations, or if any questions or concerns come up, we would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us via social media on all the usual suspects. Our handle is medredefined. You can also email us at medredefined@gmail.com. I promise you, we will check it. We'll do our best to get back to you, and just drop in and say hello. We are incredibly honored and enjoy doing this, and hearing from you would only make this process more enjoyable. If you find the show valuable, please be sure to review, give us a 5-star rating, because that tremendously helps our show and makes this platform grow for us so we can reach out to more people like you. Last but not least, please remember the important disclaimer that everything in the podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in the podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician or health coach regarding any specific health-related issues. However, as I mentioned, if you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this. And until next time, thank you for listening.